Excellent. Welcome everyone to the Maine State Breastfeeding Coalition meeting, our October meeting. Thanks for being here. And if you are watching this recording, thanks for taking the time out of your day to watch the meeting. We will get started. I believe you should all be able to see, can you see my screen? Can you see the minutes? The agenda. Okay. Thank you. So we can see that we can see our vision and mission and read those together. Our vision as a breastfeeding coalition is that when every baby receives human milk, we will be a healthier Maine. And our mission is that the MSBC is a welcoming and broad network of people supporting families who value human milk and breastfeeding. Together, we work to enhance the culture of breastfeeding around the state through professional networking, advocacy, and education. So these meetings are a big part of that, getting the chance to do some networking, offer educational resources, and education during our speaker time. And that happens to also be about advocacy today. So really excited to have Brooke join us. She mentioned she might be a few minutes late due to daycare pickup. I think many of us understand that process and balancing all of that. Thanks, Anne-Marie. So if you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat box so we all know who you are and where you're coming from. And feel free to put any questions in the chat box that you would like throughout the meeting. We'll be monitoring that. Our plan for today is to get grounded with welcoming everyone here. Amanda is taking our notes today. So thank you very much, Amanda, for taking minutes in attendance. And so that's another thing, that's one thing that's helpful with the chat box and introducing yourself is so that Amanda can capture your full name and where you might be coming from. We like to keep track of all of that. I'll spend a few minutes going over an update from our Coalition Board of Directors. Brooke will be spending a half an hour. She has some great slides with some really great information talking about advocacy in general and what that looks like in Maine in terms of the legislative process and also the difference between advocacy and lobbying. And then we'll spend a good part of our meeting, the last part, sharing, connecting the dots and sharing anything new that is happening in the state or in your work that you think would be great for us all to hear about. And then ask any questions of each other if there's something that you could use a collective insight on, or any challenges that you might be having. So it's a great opportunity for that. And that is also when we can do some more thorough introductions as well, though it's so great to be able to read those in the chat box. And then we'll wrap up at the end. So that is our plan for today. I am going to find my controls again. I don't know where, there we go. So strange where they keep going. I am going to stop that share. And there we go. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat box. Once I get back to it, you may remember in previous meetings, we have kept some notes on a Google Doc, and I'm changing the settings so that you can also edit these notes. So I'm going to put the link into the chat box. And I'm also going to share the page while I talk a bit about this next. Here we go. The Board of Directors update. So we have been busy with our strategic plan, as many of you know, and it is linked in this document here. There's also a link to a committee interest form. So you may have seen this in the last couple of emails that we've sent out, asking you to consider joining one of our committees. And we have more specific structure to our committees here to give you an idea. Basically, these committees will be responsible for creating an action plan or a work plan specific to the components in the strategic plan related to that topic. And those action plans would include action steps and measurable metrics. And we've already brainstormed some strategies. The link that is in that document does link to a document that has a lot of small text in there, but if you zoom in, you can see what strategies we've already brainstormed. They can certainly be adjusted based on who is working on this work. But based on those, you would take the next steps in creating action plans. And then working with myself and or a future executive director, which is one of our goals, to hire a staff member to ensure that these action plans are actually implemented. So the committees we have that we are hoping to fill are the Workplace Support Committee, and that committee would be looking at drafting best practices workplace toolkit that we hope to roll out soon, developing a system to designate breastfeeding friendly workplaces, and cultivating ways to increase the number of supportive work environments for families. And we expect each of the committees would be meeting maybe every 1 to 2 months, probably totaling around 2 hours a month. So if you're wondering about a time commitment, it would be around that. Certainly some months are going to be more than others, some will be less than others. So that's just a general idea of what to expect. And then we have our advocacy committee, and that would be working on a work plan around, we're hoping to have one policy initiative or legislative initiative each year that we could be focusing on. Paid family medical leave is certainly a big one every year. I can give an update on that later. Workplace support, donor breast milk, et cetera. We also have a diversity, equity, and inclusion and engagement committee, and this would be focusing on how can we deepen our community engagement around the state and inclusivity, specifically among underrepresented and underserved groups. So some voices that we aren't hearing in our current coalition. And communications would be website, email, social media, messaging in general. How can we increase our reach and deepen that engagement, making sure our education and resources are accessible and widely shared, using our current communication pathways, and what else could we be using it to? Fundraising and event planning, this could be a really fun work group or committee to be working on. So looking at an annual fundraising campaign, working on World Breastfeeding Week, we always have a lot to do there, and a storytelling event. So every year we've had, since our really great event in 2019, we've had to postpone due to the pandemic, but really hopeful that 2022 will be the year. We already have one Longfellow Square booked, I believe. So now is the time to really get started on planning for that event. And then sustainability, that's essentially our board of directors. Our board of directors are usually supposed to be focused on fiduciary responsibility, so increasing financial stability and continuing to develop our board and recruit new board members. Always interested in having more board members. So if you're interested, don't ever hesitate to reach out. Okay, so that is all in that document there. So please feel free to take a look at that, ask any questions. And well, does anyone have any questions right now? I think we have a minute before Brooke starts. Any questions or thoughts? While you're thinking about that, I'm actually going to put in the chat box a link to the committee interest form if you haven't already checked it out, and let us know. I think we do plan on following up with some of you who we know have been really engaged and interested in being a part of the coalition and are really excited to have something specific to work on. So we now have more of those opportunities, and we're really excited. We've been pretty focused in the past on getting ourselves going as a nonprofit, getting that strategic plan started, and now we really have some exciting projects that you can really jump in on. So I'm hopeful that we will have a number of you joining a committee. All right, so before we turn it over to Brooke, if you haven't already introduced yourself in the chat box, please do. I haven't actually done that, and I can do that now. My name is Kara Kaikini, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the board president of the Maine State Breastfeeding Coalition, and I live in Freeport. Good question, Carrie. I see that you typed that in the chat box. When do you expect the committees to start? I would say within the next month. I would love to see some meetings starting, and we would ideally we have a board member who's kind of leading the charge and able to report back to our board at our board meetings every time. But we are really happy to encourage your leadership for other people who are part of the coalition to encourage your leadership with any of these committees too. So that really would entail scheduling the meetings, creating an agenda, making sure someone's taking notes that can be saved and shared. So if that is something that interests you, that is excellent. But first, at least gathering names of folks who are interested and going from there. Okay. All right. Well, I see Brooke has sent me her presentation. So Brooke, I also can turn it over to you if you would prefer to kind of control your own slides. Do you have a preference?
Kara, if you can control the slides, that would be great. Because I can't figure out how to see my presenter notes.
Wow. Yeah.
So if you're doing the slides.
Yeah, I think I am good to go. So let me actually figure out how to I'm not as used to Google Slides, so I just need to see how to make it full screen.
Under view, I think if you do under the view tab.
Present. Okay. All right, so let me actually do that again and move it over to my other monitor so that I can see the Zoom stuff. Oh, no, that's not working. So percent, and then I'm back over to Zoom and I'm sharing that screen. Okay, can everyone see Brooke's screen, or my screen, but Brooke's presentation? Okay,
yes.
Awesome. Brooke, would you like to introduce yourself and maybe that special person who's with you as well?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Brooke Barron. This is Theo. He's 11 weeks old and will probably be breastfeeding at some point during this presentation, just to be on brand. I work in the Maine State Legislature as a senior policy advisor. I am currently on maternity leave. So I want to emphasize that I'm speaking in my own capacity and not in my role in the legislature. And previously, before moving to Maine, I worked in Washington, D.C., in Congress, and in the Obama administration, and also have a master's of public policy. So I hope this will be a helpful presentation. I'm going to get a burp cloth, just one moment.
I think if there's any audience that's going to be understanding and flexible with all of this, I think this is the audience. So take your time, Brooke. And thank you for making the time and to prepare these slides, this presentation, and being here today on your maternity leave.
You're welcome. And yes, I know it's a very supportive environment to bring Theo to be part of. And as you can already tell, I intend this to be a really casual conversation, and please pipe in with any questions or comments. And we just have half an hour, but we'll, with Kara's help, cover as much as we can. So just, either raise your hand or just unmute yourselves if you have any questions. So next slide, Kara. So for anyone who's pays attention to the policymaking process in any way, it may, this little comic may feel like a little too real, that there is just a really mystifying, complicated process for a bill to become law. It's not what we all learned on Schoolhouse Rock, of a pretty straightforward process. It is complicated, and you're not alone in feeling that way. But I hope that this presentation can demystify it a little bit, and also help you think about ways that you can advocate for policies that you care about. Next slide. And this presentation is going to focus on state policy making. So just to be clear, start from basics. You all in Maine, you have state representatives and state senators who are representing you and serving you at the State House in Augusta. And there are also federal policymakers. So that's the congresswomen and congressmen and senators that represent and serve you in Washington, D.C. So here in Maine, depending on where you live in the state, it's either Congresswoman Shelley Pingree or Congressman Jared Golden, and then also Senators Angus King and Senator Susan Collins. So those are your federal policymakers. Today, we're going to focus on state policymaking. And I'm going to give you just a brief introduction to the legislative process. And before we get to that, we're going to talk a little bit about what advocacy is and what lobbying is and the differences there. So next slide. So here in Maine, the state is represented by 35 state senators. Each represents about 37,000 people. And also 151 Maine state representatives. So these are all the folks that are serving you in Augusta. It's a part-time legislature. They're paid about $12,000 a year. So they're either retired or have other jobs. And the state representatives represent about 9,000 people each. So for example, Portland has 7 reps because it's the biggest city. And those are separated by geography. So each neighborhood would have its own, or a group of neighborhoods would, making up 9,000 people would have their own rep. Harpswell, where I live, we have 1 rep, and because we're not big enough to have our own, we share 1 rep with part of Brunswick. And all state senators and all state reps, they're all elected every 2 years. And the governor's elected every 4 years and can be reelected. One thing I just want to mention really quickly is something you might have heard about is redistricting. So since the whole country just finished the census this past year, every state has to redraw its boundaries to make sure that they're all balanced by population. So this means that you may be in a different state house or state senate district in the next election, 2022, than you've been in the last 10 years. And that's just part of the Constitution, that we have to redraw districts every 10 years. Okay, next slide. So what is advocacy? I found a few helpful quotes here. So one definition is public support for a recommendation of a particular cause or policy. Another way to think about it is advocacy is a crucial part of the democratic process that allows citizens to express their viewpoints and opinions to policymakers. And 501c3s or nonprofits are allowed to engage in any type of advocacy, education, or lobbying that furthers its charitable purpose. But they can only engage in a small amount of legislative lobbying, and it has to be reported to the IRS. So next slide, we'll talk about lobbying and what that difference is there. And Kara, you, with your experience in the nonprofits, you probably know more about this distinction than I do, so feel free to weigh in here too. So all lobbying is advocacy, but not all advocacy is lobbying. And that's because lobbying must meet 3 very specific criteria and has to meet all of these. So lobbying requires communicating with policymakers, and that could be a legislator, it could be a legislative staff, which is what I am, it could be governor's office. That communication has to be about legislation, specific legislation, and it has to be urging a vote for or against. So if it meets, if something is lobbying, if it meets all 3 of those criteria, and it's important to note that generally organizations like nonprofits cannot pay for lobbying with any government grants, and there may be other grant funding that limits lobbying using that specific funding. And Kara, is there anything you want to add about this distinction?
Just that I've spent a lot of time over the last few years trying to understand this as best I can to make sure that we as a 501c3 are following all the rules. And we have great resources on this and people we can talk to about this to make sure we are doing that. But it is a little, it's a lot to understand. And so utilizing our resources is really important. As you know, we have talked a lot about the donor breast milk bill and have encouraged people to support it. Same thing with paid leave. But it is only a certain percentage of the time that we spend doing things as a coalition. And so that's I'm forgetting the term or the name for that.
Is it de minimis?
Sure, I haven't heard that one, but it's basically a portion of your time is what.
Yeah.
It has to be a certain percentage. Well, that's actually the part that it doesn't say the actual percentage and how to figure it. And if volunteer time counts as that, those are the weeds that we can get caught up in sometimes. But it's really helpful to have all of this. Thank you.
Definitely. So we don't want to get really bogged down on like these legal definitions, but just to focus on this presentation is focusing on advocacy. So ways that we can all get involved to influence the policy making process. Next slide. So here I just want to brainstorm a little bit about different ways that advocacy takes place in the legislative process. So I'm wondering if any of you all have advocated for a policy proposal and how, and if not, if you have ideas for what advocacy could look like. And Kara, if you want to jump off by talking about your role as an advocate.
Sure. So I have given public testimony and submitted written testimony for the donor breast milk bill and for paid leave. So I've had a few opportunities in the past year to do that. And yes, it can be really intimidating at first and nerve-wracking and not, wanting to make sure you're doing it right. And there are certain rules to follow along. But I'll say once you've done it once, it's a lot easier after that. And you don't even have to give public or oral testimony when you do that. You could just submit it in writing. And it's a lot easier now. I don't know if it's going to change where public testimony is happening in person again. But it's really nice now that it can be done. You can just log onto your computer. You don't have to wait, for your turn at a public hearing. You don't have to drive to Augusta. So I hope that they continue to have more accessible opportunities to be giving testimony. And I think that will probably happen. So those are some examples I can think of, but I would love to hear from others. I see some folks are saying some things in the chat box.
Yeah, I think Kayla mentions grassroots advocacy, talking directly to lawmakers, submitting testimony, giving spoken testimony, getting large groups of people together with signs at the State House. Those are all great examples. Robin mentions advocating for IBCLC licensure, making trips to the State House, agrees that it gets easier over time. Mentions, I think even if you only speak to legislative aides, they are young people who are learning something about family healthcare and childcare. That's great. And anybody else?
I was just gonna say, this is Kayla. I was just gonna add, I think I sent it before I finished, but I was just gonna say, I think like a large part of it is education. Like, I think a lot of times the public or lawmakers maybe don't have education around certain issues. So I think like talking about it and educating people is a big part of it, you know?
Definitely. Yep. Education is so important. And that that can happen at any point in the process. You know, you don't have to have a specific bill to testify for, to go and talk to a legislator about why breastfeeding is important or why childhood nutrition is important or whatever issue you're talking about.
Yeah, I definitely remember that happening when we went for the donor milk one, Kara. There was just like an older man on I don't know what it's called, not the panel, but like the people in front. And he really had no idea like the differences between formula and breastfeeding, or so there had to be some like basic education around that. And but I thought it was really cool that there was an educational space for those kind of things.
Absolutely. And I would remind you that these legislators are there in the State House working for you. You know, their job is to represent you. So not to be intimidated to ask for a meeting or to call or to email to ask for their time, because that is their job, both the legislators and the staff.
Absolutely. And if you look at what they have to hear every day in terms of testimony when it's time for all these committee hearings to happen, there's so much, they're hearing so much. And like, just to reiterate, they don't know a lot about breastfeeding. Occasionally you'll have a physician on a committee, or the Health and Human Services Committee, or if it's related to this topic. So that can be helpful, but still they're looking for experts. But also, I mean, we always want stories from actual parents who these bills will affect. So the more, even if that's how you're getting involved, I mean, I like how you asked that question, Brooke, how can we get involved? Even if it's just talking to people, and if you know that they have an experience that they could share, just encouraging them to go through the process. And if they're feeling nervous about how to do it, they can contact us. They can also contact the Maine Women's Lobby, for guidance. There's some resources that Brooke will share, and I also will have in that document already, that shared Google Doc, that I'll put in the chat box again. But if you're feeling nervous, there are people to talk to. And I think, were you about to share what Amy said, Brooke? Or Amy,
Yes.
I don't know if you're still on or not.
And can everyone hear me still? Okay, I just got a note saying my connection was unstable. But yeah, Amy had another great one. She was part of a letter to the editor workshop for the coalition with the Maine Women's Lobby, and the letter she wrote was published in the Press Herald. That's a great way, because when you read a letter to the editor, that reaches so many people. It's so influential. Doing a letter to the editor campaign is a really wonderful way to advocate. And Robin's had a couple great points. She said the more we normalize breastfeeding and paid family leave, the more it becomes more important and not so much of a niche issue. And in her experience, 2 or 3 main, clear, and brief points are easier to get the message across. Practice an elevator speech. How do you explain your point to anyone in less than 3 minutes? So these are all great. Kara, if you want to go to the next slide.
Yeah. I'll reiterate what Anne Marie said about Robin. Robin had a really incredible public testimony. So thank you for that, Robin. And for the practicing an elevator speech, like that could be a whole session or discussion on its own, is what is an elevator speech on a specific topic. And yeah, so that's awesome. I love all these ideas.
So yeah, these were some ones that I had brainstormed earlier. You guys hit all of them, most of them. But there are, writing letters, emailing, doing a postcard writing campaign. So similar letter to the editor campaign, getting a big group together to all send postcards to their legislators, asking a legislator to give a speech on behalf of a certain piece of legislation that, and depending on their level of expertise, maybe helping them write that speech. I'm glad someone mentioned grassroots stuff. So rallies, protests, speeches, marches, those are all really powerful ways to get involved that, can be adjacent to the State House or outside the State House, but not they don't necessarily need to be. It could be in your home communities too. And just in the interest of time, moving along, we'll keep going. So now just to back up and give you a sense of what the legislative process looks like. So let's see. So much in Maine, in the Maine legislative process is just driven by the calendar. And so I think it's really helpful to know when things happen and when there are opportunities to plug in as an advocate. So in Maine, we're on a 2-year legislative cycle. So looking ahead to the beginning of the next cycle will begin next November 2022, so in just over a year, when all of your state senators and all of your state reps will be elected. And next year will also be the governor is up for re-election. So just a month after they're all elected is the date that's known as cloture. So that's the deadline to file bills for the legislative session, which means that if you want to have a bill introduced or a policy considered, that is your time, meaning those freshman legislators have just been elected and they already have to submit bill proposals, which means if there's something that you want to do, you should really be thinking about it way before December. But like next summer and fall, getting ideas ready to go. So it could be a really detailed proposal or it could be something really general. So the example I was thinking about was, let's say you believe there should be a bill to increase teacher pay. So if that's all you know is that you think teachers should be paid more, you could ask a legislator to introduce a bill that just says that. This is a concept draft to explore ways to increase teacher pay. Or if you've already done a lot of thinking about it and perhaps you already have a coalition formed around this idea, you could ask someone to introduce a bill that says something very specific, like teacher pay should be raised to $50,000 a year. So it doesn't you don't have to have all the details ironed out by December, but you have to at least have a framework. And I think usually the more details, the better. And then the rest, everything else that happens with the bill, the hearings, the votes, everything will happen between December and June of that long legislative session. And I'll go into more detail about that in a moment, but just for now, to stay on the calendar, after the legislature adjourns for the year, that's when the working groups meet, the commissions. I know this year the Commission on Paid Family Leave will be starting to meet soon. The working groups, those all meet when the legislature is not in session. And then starting in January, the legislature will come back and it's for the short legislative session. And they're there to finish up any work that they didn't get to before and consider new legislation, but only if it's considered an emergency. So of course, legislators will all be trying to make the case that their proposal is an emergency. But generally it's a much more limited scope of what's considered during the short legislative session. And then legislature should leave around April, and they'll be out of session until the next election. So one thing I want to emphasize here, beyond that this cloture date in December is really important, it's that in a 2-year session, the legislature is only in session for about 10 months. So it's a really concentrated, short amount of time where you can weigh in directly. So just something to keep in mind.
I have a question, Brooke. The donor milk reimbursement bill, it passed the House and the Senate, correct? But it was carried over, like the governor didn't get a chance to sign that. Is that what happened? And then what's next then?
Yeah, so for the donor milk bill, if you want to zoom ahead 2 slides just for a minute, I can show you where it is in the process. So the donor milk bill passed its first vote in the House, its first vote in the Senate, and it made it to enactment in the House. So right now it's sitting in this orange square called the appropriations table. So it's waiting to be funded. And every year there's a limited amount of money that's divvied up among all the bills that make it this far. So this past year, the money went pretty fast. And so all the bills that did not receive the funding were carried over on the table. So that means that that bill is sitting here on the table. And when the legislature comes back this winter and has its new pot of money to divvy up, it will then go through and see if there's decide which bills will get funded, and donor milk bill is one of those bills that will be competing in this pot of money. And then if and when it does get that money, it has one more vote in the Senate, but that's pretty procedural because it's already passed the Senate once, and then it goes to the governor's desk.
So there's anything else that we would need to be doing for that, or would we just, and let's just say it doesn't, so a couple questions, anything else we should be doing for this? And two, if it doesn't get funded, then what happens? Do we have to re-propose it in January or December?
I think that in general, so this bill was introduced by Rep. Margaret Craven, who's on the HHS, Health and Human Services Committee. I think the best approach is to reach out to her as the sponsor to see if she has plans of ways to advocate for this bill, and to see if you could get a commitment from her that this would be one of her priorities, and ask how you can support her as the sponsor in prioritizing this bill. And then a lot will just depend. Will there be $1 million for all the bills to divvy up on the table, or will there be $10 million? Both are in the realm of possibility. I think last year there was enough funding to fund maybe 10% of the bills that landed there. So one big difference between the State House and US Congress, we've probably been hearing about the debt ceiling and all this borrowing, the federal debt and deficit. The state cannot carry a debt or deficit at all. The state has to balance its books every single year. So the only money that the state can spend is the money that's actually come in. So that is a really important difference and makes it so it's a lot more limited about what can be spent every year. And if it does not get funded, then yes, at the end of next April, most likely any bill that hasn't made it all the way to the governor's desk will die, and would have to be reintroduced again next December 2022, which is frustrating. And I know, especially for something like paid leave that many of you have worked on, and it's taken several cycles. I think every cycle it gets a little easier. There's more support, more people. You're not starting at zero. More people understand the issue and why it's important. You've done a lot of that baseline work. So it certainly stinks to have to start over again, but it's not like it was all for naught.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so if you can go back one. So after a legislator submits an idea for a bill, it will then get assigned an LD number, which stands for legislative document, and will be assigned to a committee. So back when I was talking about teacher pay, that bill would get assigned to the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee because it has to do with education. A lot of the donor milk bill was in the Health and Human Services Committee. The Paid Family Leave Committee was in Labor and Housing. Each committee in Maine has both senators and representatives on it, which is nice and efficient instead of having one Senate committee and one House committee. Right now, so that also means there's a House chair and a Senate chair of every committee. Right now, based on the balance of power between Democrats and Republicans, most committees have 8 Democrats and 5 Republicans. And these lightning bolts that I put in represent times and opportunities for advocacy. So public hearing, awesome opportunity for advocacy. In Maine, every single bill gets a hearing and anyone can testify. Depending on the committee, there are different limits. Generally, it's around a 3-minute testimony, although some committees are more strict than others. As Karen mentioned, since COVID hit, there's been a lot more flexibility on testifying. It's been primarily, or actually, I think exclusively via Zoom. And no final decisions have been made for if that's going to continue in the same way come January. I think it will really just depend on what situation we're in with COVID in January to make sure that everyone can be safe and also participate. Another thing that's really different from Congress and different from a lot of states, every bill gets a hearing and every bill gets a vote. And so generally there'll be a public hearing, anyone can testify, and then it's usually a week or two later will be the vote, which happens during the work session. There's some instances, such as the donor breast milk bill, where no one testified in opposition. It seemed like a no-brainer, and the committee decided to move directly to work session, which means it held a vote immediately after the public hearing. That's really special. It shows how non-controversial an issue is. It means that everyone agrees that it should move forward, and it received unanimous support, but that is rare. So generally it will take a week or two for the legislators to get more information, for the nonpartisan offices to provide additional analysis, and then the vote will happen. So back to this example about teacher pay, if that bill was up for a vote, that legislators could either vote to support it, ought to pass, to oppose it, ought not to pass, or ought to pass as amended. So they might say, okay, we'd like to raise teacher pay, but only to $48,000. Or, it doesn't really make sense for teachers to get paid the same in Portland and Presque Isle, so let's have it based on what county they're in. So the bill can be changed in large and small ways at any step of the way. And if the bill was originally introduced as a concept draft, where it's just a really vague idea, this is when they're actually going to nail down the details and put together the language for what the bill is actually going to say. Is there anything you want to add to that, Kara, that part? Or anybody else?
I don't have anything else, but yeah, this great chance for any other questions or any
yeah,
other.
and just, yeah, and we did go through this process a little bit. If you want to back up, yeah, perfect. So I just had kind of rushed through this with the donor milk bill, but so if a bill receives majority support from the committee, then it will go on to the House and Senate. Actually, if it receives any support in the committee, if even one person votes for it, it goes on to the House and Senate. If it receives no support at all, then it doesn't receive a vote in the whole House and Senate. So you just need one person to support it, and then it will go on to the House and Senate. So it's complicated. Each bill has to be voted on multiple times by both bodies, which means there are multiple opportunities to get support and to get your word out. So if a bill fails by a vote or two on its first vote, and it's something you care about, you can then get involved and talk to your legislator and say, hey, I saw that you voted no on this engrossment vote. This is why this bill is so important. We'd love to have your support next time around. And then there's a second chance for the vote to go your way. So these lightning bolts are all different times where an advocate could get involved. Anything with a price tag does have to go to the appropriations table where the budget is divvied up. And that is a big barrier, and it's often the biggest barrier to a bill. Also, if a bill received unanimous support in the committee, then it still technically goes through this process, but it's very unlikely to have debate or to have a roll call vote where people actually go one by one and say how they would vote on the bill. So it just becomes a lot easier if you get unanimous support from the committee. There's one last step. So once the bill hits the governor's desk, then the governor chooses whether to sign it or to veto it. In some instances, she'll also let it become the law without her signature, which in the end doesn't mean that much. It still becomes a law. It just doesn't have, it's her way of saying maybe it wouldn't have been her first choice to do things this way. But it still is law. There's one more opportunity for advocacy at this step, once a bill becomes law. So back to the raising teacher pay example. Once that bill became law, let's say that the committee decided to advance the language that said teachers should be given some kind of pay bump depending on where they live in the state to make it fair. And if they didn't iron out all the details in that bill, then that gets kicked to the Department of Education that then has to do rulemaking. And they have to then iron out anything that was left out. So that's another opportunity after the bill's actually law to weigh in with public comment to the Department of Education to say, hey, I think that you should prioritize this, this, and this when you're deciding what teacher pay should be in each county. So just an example of how the advocacy process can continue on even after bills are signed into law. So that was really quick and a really broad overview. And I know we have a lot of other things we're trying to get to today, but I'm happy to answer a few questions and also just happy to be a resource for folks in the future.
I have a quick question. You said something about like how bills that have a price tag go to appropriations and that can be a barrier. I was just trying to think, like, doesn't pretty much every bill have a price tag? Like, I was trying to think of like an example of a bill that wouldn't have a price tag. Like, don't
that's
they
a
most?
good question. That's a good question. And it's specifically a state price tag. So something like that teacher pay bill, that pay would be borne out by the school districts and the towns and counties as opposed to the state, I think. Although now that I say that, I'm questioning that. But what about a bill to ban a certain kind of, like, ban lobstering within a certain number of miles because of the right whales? So something like that we've been hearing a lot about, like a ban bill or a bill that prohibited discrimination based on sex or sexual orientation. There some workplace rights bills that would have a cost to the employer but not to the state. Those would all be examples. Increasing the minimum wage, has some state price tag because that means that state workers have to get paid more too, but most of that pay increases borne in the private sector. So things that either don't impact, it's anything that doesn't impact the state budget specifically.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. I didn't think of those things. I just always tend to like think that everything costs money. Pretty much does, right?
Yeah, and most things do. Good question.
So I have a question, Brooke. Thank you, first of all, for that. That was a really great overview. I feel like I can't hear that process enough times to really understand it because it's quite a process and I don't really remember learning it in school. And I don't think it would have been as meaningful to me at the time. It means a lot more to me now that I'm working on issues that could use that legislative support. We are part of the Maine paid leave and paid family and medical leave coalition. I attend those meetings every other month. And one update I was going to give in this next part of the meeting was that we met yesterday and talked about how the bill that was passed this last time was one for developing a commission to then develop the paid leave benefits program. And so that passed to develop the commission, and that was really exciting. So right now, the next steps are to fill the seats that are on that commission. And that should be done by the end of this month. And then the first report out would be February. So I think what they said yesterday was that they're just waiting for the governor to fill her seat. So different people appointed different people to this commission, and the governor gets to appoint actually the maternal child health representative. So I'm really curious to see who she invites to be part of that commission. Another thing that came up in this meeting, and there are a number of different people on this coalition, including the Maine People's Alliance, and they spoke a bit about how we might want to think about, as a paid leave state coalition to work on a possible ballot initiative or referendum. And in case the policy doesn't get passed through the legislature, what should we have a backup plan? And so that was really interesting to learn more about, okay, what happens through the state house and what happens and, you know, what gets to the governor's desk and then what happens on the ballot. And I don't know if you can spend a couple of minutes talking about that. I think it was a really good, interesting debate. Some people were saying, but that's not a good idea. Some people were saying we should have something prepared just in case, and it would be voted on in 2023 is what they were saying. So I don't know if you have anything you could share about that process and how those decisions are made, whether or not you put something on the ballot, you get people's signatures, and then people vote versus going through your legislator.
You cut out a little bit, but I did hear you talking about the ballot initiative process, and you know that isn't something I've ever worked on, so I don't know. I'm not as familiar with that process, but it does involve, you know, collecting signatures and collecting a certain number of signatures to get on the ballot, and then a lot of grassroots advocacy to get your word out, because you're no longer trying to influence those 35 senators and 151 reps. You're trying to influence the 1 million voters in Maine. So it's a big undertaking, but not one that I've worked on before. And if anyone else has experience with ballot initiatives, please weigh in. Talking about federal or paid leave, it also made me think about the fact that 12 weeks of paid family leave are part of the Build Back Better social infrastructure proposal that's currently being considered in US Congress. So it's also great, you know, if that passes, that would be great. It would also mean that Maine's work was possibly no longer necessary, because that would be covering Maine families. So, you know, certainly something to celebrate. And at the same time, it's a good example of you can work for years on a certain policy and then US Congress can decide to go in a certain direction, and it kind of makes your work not moot, but take a different direction.
Yeah, that was something that came up earlier last year because, you know, the federal government has been talking about this for a long time as well. And really excited to see that momentum and that progress. But the folks at the state were still saying, or on this paid leave coalition anyway, that it's still, even if it does pass, there's still something that we could do as a state that would be a little bit different or more offer more protections or something, so that hopefully that's not the case, that it means that our work isn't helpful. But again, really important to understand the process, that there is the federal process and the state process. So I really appreciate you breaking that down for a bit.
Yeah, and usually for most issues of law, the federal government preempts the state government. So, you know, not always. And I think that our recreational marijuana legislation is a example of where there's also a big gray area. Marijuana is illegal federally, but several, at this point, many states have legalized it, and it's still illegal federally, but the federal government is not doing anything to enforce that law. And so it just shows that there can be a gray area between who's really in charge between state laws and federal laws.
Well, that's a good point. I have one more question then, all related. So Maine's workplace support law in terms of breastfeeding in the workplace protects lactating parents for 3 years, I believe, but the federal law is 1 year. So, and I thought that the state law actually offered, since it does offer more protection, that working parents had that protection for 3 years, and that it wasn't the federal law that overrode that.
Yeah, so something like that, the federal law would be creating a floor. So it has to be, all states have to have legislation or policies that are at least this strong, but some states can choose to have stronger policies. Sometimes the federal government will create a floor and sometimes they'll create a ceiling, or it can be anything up to this amount.
Okay.
Great question.
Amy, I don't know if you want to unmute and ask that question.
Sure. So I was just wondering, Brooke, or others who have experience with this, when issues are raised at the state level, does it make it more likely that they'll come up federally? Like I hate to think that people feel that their work at the state level is somehow going to waste, when it's probably likely that the fact that so many states are talking about it and have these bills in their legislature are actually leading to it getting more notice and more traction federally. I just wonder if you have, that's my intuition. I don't know if that's actually true. So I was wondering if you could speak to that, Brooke, or anyone else.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that it can. I mean, I think that if you're trying to pass, like they are right now, 12 weeks of paid family leave, that to have, the dozen or so states that already have it in place, and to have it working well, that is the best endorsement possible, to say, hey, it's already covering this many million Americans, and it's affecting this change in their lives. Wonderful. And I think especially the senators and the congressmen and congresswomen from those states, it would look pretty bad for them to be opposing something that they already have in their states. There's also, I think it can also go the other way, like for the federal minimum wage. I think the fact that a lot of states have a higher minimum wage, Maine's is over $12 versus $7 and change. I think it can kind of, in some cases, slow down the momentum. If everyone in the country were really getting a minimum wage of only $7, there would probably be more rationale to really fight for that, instead of saying, well, in our state, we're actually doing okay with our minimum wage, so this isn't going to be our top priority. So I think it can go both ways. And I think there are also some issues that are really politicized at the national level that it can be easier to just, say, if it's working out in these states, let's just let the states figure it out and not weigh in for the whole country. But it's a great question.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Brooke. I know that we're over time a little bit, but it's always good conversation, still related to the connecting the dots part of our meeting. So thank you very much for presenting, Brooke, and Theo. Thanks for being such a trooper. So cute.
Yeah, thank you, Brooke. And I just wanted to say, I think it's so beautiful that you have your baby there and that you're breastfeeding and everything. And I think we should really move towards this becoming more acceptable in all spaces, right? Like, I think it's so cool. So thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for saying that.
I'm going to put in the chat box that shared Google document again, and also mention that there are some advocacy resources in that document, and I'll see if I can copy and paste those in there as well. But, if you're wanting to know more, I know that in the past, folks who work for the government or for WIC or any other big organization, there are like some limits, and it's not always encouraging to do advocacy. So the National WIC Association actually has a really great website about advocacy and how people can participate. The USBC, United States Breastfeeding Committee, is an incredible resource. And you're seeing us share things, federally that we can be supporting, like the Pump Act is a big deal right now. Lots of emails. If you're not already part of the United States Breastfeeding Committee, I encourage you to sign up for their emails. And then the Maine Women's Lobby has really great information about citizen advocacy, how to write a testimony, how to do all of that. So great resource for you to have there. So thank you. I think now feel free, just want to set a reminder, and in that document too, I'll give a little plug to the Let's Go program through Maine Health. They have a part of their website for adults, employers in particular, workplace toolkit for stretch breaks for during meetings or during the workday. So if you're looking for some new ideas for how to get some movement into your day, and especially during meetings and webinars and that sort of thing, you would look under the increased movement at work, and there's a neat PDF. So feel free to take a moment to stretch, stand up, do whatever you need to do during this meeting at any time. And I will turn it over to you, Amanda, to facilitate the second part of the meeting.
Okay, do you mind pulling the agenda up so I can read that?
I will, and I'll also copy and paste the, that is not the right agenda. I'll copy and paste those questions as well, but I can share the screen. There we go. Can you see that okay?
Yes, sorry,
Okay.
my screen was going in a weird view. All right, so this is Connecting the Dots, and I'm Amanda Powell. I'm the Vice President of the Maine State Breastfeeding Coalition. And I think many of you have been a part of this part before. So this is where we really just have open discussions. I'll call on each of you, and feel free to pass if you want, but this is a really great time to ask any questions because you have a lot of different experts. I'm going to call you all experts here. So you can talk about what's happening legislatively. You can talk about research. You can ask questions with your work. We're all really here to, help and make those connections. So where can I start? I will start with Allison. Is it Marco?
Sorry, I had some trouble with camera function today, so you just get to hear my voice. But yes, it's Marco.
Oh, that's okay.
Thank you.
Great.
I guess I don't really have anything to update. I'm the breastfeeding coordinator from Maine General WIC, and we don't really have anything new going on. We've tried to see clients in person, but we've had to dial back with that a little bit. So that's been frustrating just because of some outbreaks in our local schools. So but I can't think of anything really to add right now, maybe in a little bit.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
then Catherine, Laurie. You're still muted if you're trying to talk. Okay, I'll move on, Catherine, but if you have anything that you want to add, please let us know. And Kayla?
Geez, I don't think I have much to add. I participated in a documentary, like a short 8-minute documentary where abolitionists from like all over the state of Maine made this ABCs of abolition. And it was cool because my part of it was M is for motherhood. So that was like really cool. There was like a couple sentences that I was able to write around motherhood. So that was like really exciting. And yeah, that's kind of pretty much it. I've been like working with clients that are in recovery or, entering recovery and, trying to help them and advocate and stuff like that. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right, thank you. And Sienna? Are you there, Sienna? We can't hear you. All right, I'll move on to Jen Vijay.
Hello. Same with WIC, and I started from York County Community Action Program, so it's pretty much the same with Allison. The state has issued like a little bit of an adjustment to our approved food list, so that's been what we've been discussing with clients. So they have made adjustments there. York County is still like weighing babies that parents are concerned with weight gain and that sort of thing. So we do see those folks. We're still primarily remote and talking to our clients over the phone. And then any clients that want to be weighed and measured, we weigh them in the office. That's about it for us.
Great, thank you. Robin?
Hello, I had to unmute myself. I have nothing to report. Sorry, I didn't realize that the donor human milk bill wasn't actually fully a law. So I have to go back in and write to Representative Craven and just keep the conversation going. So I learned something new today. That was really, really helpful.
I'm going to add and just thank Robin for, in the past, I think I may have thanked Robin already publicly for helping to keep our website updated and work with that. And also she has some really great ideas for communications and that committee in particular. So if you are interested in that as well, and that I think is a good example of Robin not seeing, like we didn't communicate very well, I guess, because you're not the only person who has had that question about what happened with the donor milk bill. It was a couple weeks ago. I got a couple of emails and I was thinking, did I send that email out? Did that go out? And not everyone reads or gets their emails. So how many different other pathways can we be taking advantage of to make sure that we are communicating as clearly as possible? So that's a really important committee. If anyone wants to be helping Robin and others with that work, please let us know.
Thanks, Kara. Amy Van Haren.
I got a big monitor, which is not breastfeeding offering, but it's a big step in terms of my ergonomic health. And I feel like a grandmother on technology trying to unmute myself now when I move. So hi. Gosh, this week I attended the Black Mothers Breastfeeding Association conference, and it was really, really inspiring and powerful. And so I just had too many things going on. I should have shared it with this group earlier, but if you don't have them on your radar, I highly recommend Kadada Green as the president, and they're just a wonderful group out of Detroit. So that was really insightful and inspiring and kind of infused the work that we are doing, which I love. And we were just kind of head down on workplace support. That's what I've been thinking about and working on with us at Pump Spotting and the team. And I guess maybe the biggest news is we're in talks to maybe bring Barb out of retirement, our RV, and get her back on the road. So keep you posted.
All right, that's great. I don't think many people know I was signed up to go on Barb right before the pandemic, and maybe it's in my future, who knows. All right, who else do we have? We have Carrie.
Yes, hi. So I'm also with WIC, the state agency. Here we're super duper excited about the CVB being passed temporarily so for those of you that aren't like super familiar with WIC, that's cash value benefits, so fresher frozen fruits and vegetables. And rather than just the $35, which is what it's been under the Emergency Act, now it is up to $47 for breastfeeding moms. So really super hopeful that that'll be a good incentive to maybe get more moms at least partially breastfeeding throughout the state. But so there's a range of an additional $32 to $36 depending on where you are in the program. So we're super excited about that.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Amy Page.
So I, as some of you know, I'm not a clinician. I work on the business side of women's and family health for Ovia Health. And so there's been a lot of exciting things happening, as Amy Van Haren knows, in women's and family health in the last few months. So a ton of money being raised, a lot of companies merging and acquiring, and including mine was purchased by LabCorp. So there's a lot of money being spent on women and families right now. And I just saw this morning that the Mom Project, I don't know if y'all are familiar, but it's helping keep women in the workforce and helping moms find jobs that fit their lives. But they just secured their Series C funding of $80 million, which is just amazing news for working women and working moms. And it's just really exciting to see all this support, and the fact that it's gaining traction, you know, nationally, and people are talking about it and spending money on it is very exciting. So little headline from LinkedIn this morning. And I'll add, my sister had a baby 3.5 weeks ago. So I've got all the brand new mom breastfeeding stuff that you all live in all day, every day. I'm getting to, you know, experience it all over again, and it's been really fun.
That's great. Congratulations.
Yay.
Nicole Hart.
Hi, everyone. Nothing is super coming to mind. Maine Mother and Company is back to, we are now running 2 in-person new parent groups a week. And that's been really, really good. The parents who are there, the ones who really need to be there. I've got like all the tongue-tied babies. Seeing a lot of breastfeeding struggles, and you know, that's why they're there, so it's really good. I'm hearing, I don't know if this is, you know, that a challenge I would categorize under my work, but I am, as we're approaching colder weather and holidays, I'm hearing a lot of overwhelm and questions from new moms about how to navigate another season of holidays with COVID, and there's just really no good recommendations for them. So that's definitely something to kind of put on MSBC's radar. Like, there might be some things we could do to kind of give folks a little bit of like some questions to ask, not recommendations, but some frameworks perhaps. And I'm wondering like if WIC clients are hearing, you know, might be going through some similar things. So that's what comes to mind first for me. It's good to be here with you all.
Thanks, Nicole. Okay, did I get everything? Is it just me and Kara left, I think?
Yeah, first, Amanda, I'm wondering if anyone else has any thoughts on that, if you're also hearing the same thing that Nicole's hearing. We have plenty of time to have these discussions. I know with the breastfeeding group at Maine Med, I feel like it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about preparing for the winter season and how do we make decisions, and decision fatigue is a real thing right now, right, around COVID. And so, you know, are you hearing that stress, or are you not? Are people planning on just going forward like it's a different year now, it's a different holiday season, and it's not like last year, but is it? Yeah, it's hard to know how to navigate all that right now with vaccines, but also a variant that's rather contagious.
I wonder if we might have learned something from last year, so it's easier. Like last year, there was the whole panic of what is COVID? How do you deal with it? You got to wash everything, you know, and now we have a better sense and more people are vaccinated. So maybe that's it. But I think putting the tag on it saying decision fatigue, I think that's really an important thing for people to know. Like, that's a sign of depression when you just can't handle so much information and you can't decide, and just to tell people what that is and say, okay, just stop. It's okay to stop for just a moment. Maybe we'll just start there and say, this is a different year. I don't want to sound too, what's the word, like patsy positive or something, but I do think we have to give ourselves credit for what we have navigated already. So anyhow,
Yeah, I think I'm hearing it from a lot of moms with newborns. So
Oh,
they've been through a pandemic
me.
holiday, but perhaps not even when they were pregnant yet.
You're right.
So it's their first, and certainly it is. What I'm hearing verbalized is like, most people, their kind of support people are vaccinated, which adds a level of security. But with the Delta variant, it's like how secure is it? Like, I'm getting asked by clients, like, what should I do? And like, I can't, I'm obviously not telling them what they should do, but everyone wants to know what everyone else is doing. And so it seems like an opportunity to just share some of that, like, which is what I'm doing with my personal clients. But it's just tricky, and there's such a lack of information, I think, for parents right now. It's so tricky, as I'm like with a 3-year-old who was sent home from daycare because he was a close contact. I am now experiencing the like, well, what about the rest of us? Like, it's so confusing. And like you said, Robin, like new moms, like new parents are exhausted. It's so many decisions. And so this is like some anticipatory anxiety as they're looking ahead to the winter holidays.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, as another second time mom, but new mom again, all of the already complicated dynamics around who's holding your baby. And if you want the grandparents to hold your baby, period, because you might just want to have all the snuggles to yourself, but if they're traveling, whether or not they're vaccinated, yeah, it is really a lot to navigate emotionally and logistically.
Yeah.
And last year too, it was different because it was kind of understood. If people made the decision to stay home for Thanksgiving or for the holiday, any holiday, it's like, well, okay, yeah, because of COVID. But now I feel like family might not be as understanding, and it kind of depends too. How badly do these new families want to be traveling or want to be hosting? I mean, that's already a conversation we hear in groups every year around the holidays is, I don't want to go anywhere. I want to be with my family, or I don't want anyone to come over. It's so stressful. And so last year, personally, I can say it was one of the best Thanksgivings I've ever had because we didn't go anywhere. And it was so special. And this year, I don't know if we can really get away with saying that we're not going. I'm not sure I'm not sure family would understand that, in-laws in particular, because it's, but the CDC is still saying, don't travel, especially if you weren't vaccinated. And so we could just go with that. But that's not always, but families might want to go. And so then how can they do that safely?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I went to go visit a friend who had her new little baby, and it was lovely, and I wanted to help her out. And then she said, oh, here, you should hold her. And I actually said, oh, no, that's okay. Like, I didn't want to give her any of my germs. I didn't want to be that. But I think as a new mom, she didn't take it too well. So I felt bad about it. I'm trying to be helpful, and I almost ended up insulting her. She's still my friend, but yeah.
It's so much about how to have the conversation around it, I think, and that's what you're doing in the group and with your clients, Nicole, and with everyone here who's working with families, is encouraging them, maybe even role playing or scripting how to have a conversation around boundaries and decisions.
One of the things that we're talking about a lot with pregnant people and PR, our folks are having pregnant people be vaccinated, because the vaccination rates for pregnant people are like half of the national average. And I wonder if you all see that either, pre or post birth, that if people are not vaccinated, are they now willing once baby is out, or are they still nervous, or is it, I'm curious if you all are hearing the why behind that, if it continues post birth.
I have like an N of 1 with this.
That's okay. I'll take your anecdote, Nicole.
So yeah, I did have one client who's like, her spouse was vaccinated and her baby came in July and she chose not to get vaccinated while she was pregnant. And I think got her first dose when he was 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And it honestly seemed so arbitrary to me. I tried not to question her about it, but I was curious kind of how she landed on that amount of time. And it seemed like it was mostly just wanting to feel a little bit more rested and settled before she got a vaccine that potentially could make her feel crappy. And the reason for not getting vaccinated while she was pregnant was, I think, the reason a lot, the 70% or like whatever scary high number it is of people who aren't, like, we just don't know enough, like this, a fear of something terrible happening, and having been vaccinated being kind of the like one variable they could easily point to as a contributor.
And I think also I've heard like even people that are not pregnant, like young, like my sister-in-law and some other folks have heard, and obviously it's not true, but I think it probably just is like fear-based, but there's sort of like a rumor that that the vaccine can cause fertility issues, like for people that are not even pregnant, like just, a young person that might in the future have kids. And that really is sad that that's being like, spun around, because that prohibits people from getting the vaccine because they're scared that they're not going to be able to have children,
Yeah, I'm hearing the same. We have people like that in our not in our immediate family, but in our family. And I think like in the kind of, I don't know what to label it, kind of like natural, like holistic kind of circles that often overlap with at least my work as a doula, talk about the vaccine disrupting cycles and what does that mean. And, as a very pro-vaccination person, I have sought out information to help me understand why cycles have been wonky after getting vaccinated, and feel super reassured by that information. But I think I'm in the minority with like seeking that out. And yeah.
I wonder if this could be a topic for one of our coalition meetings in 2022, to have a physician or another, member of the medical and science world to talk about being vaccinated while pregnant, and then also the emerging research about antibodies in breast milk. I know it's all early, but I mean, for me as a pregnant person, I wanted to get vaccinated both because I didn't want to get COVID while pregnant, but also because of what seemed to be possible for protecting Theo once he was born through my antibody. So I feel like that's a really powerful, the other side of the story of how you can protect your baby while breastfeeding.
I think that's a really good idea, Brooke. And I wonder if we could even include in our other communications that we offer just information about the risk of COVID when you're pregnant. Right? Like the risk of the vaccine as compared to the risk of having a preterm baby are pretty disparate. And I feel like if you could draw that comparison of like, would you rather get the vaccine or have a baby at 34 weeks? Like to me, at least, and again, like Nicole, very pro-vaccine, but like, I think it's just so interesting to me that we're hearing OBGYNs say like, pregnant people get Tdap, no problem. Like no one's, they don't even blink at that, or the flu shot. But then this is just because I think it's new and unknown and unsure, and there's so much politicization of it, and conversation around it that people are, and it's not a bad thing to be thoughtful about what you're doing with your own body or when you're pregnant or not. I just, it's the misinformation piece that is frustrating to me, and people not realizing the risk of going without. You know, that probably outweighs the risk of getting it. I'd love us to advocate for it.
Well,
But I
that's,
love your
yeah,
idea about education, Brooke.
I was just going to just reiterate that same thing. I love the idea about education. And that might be one of the opportunities where we can kind of plug in, you know, that we were just talking about how a lot of people experience like information overload and fatigue, and just saying like, look, we know that there's so much information being thrown at you, and we would just want to offer you these resources, you know, so that in your own time you can check them out and like learn more about the things that you're concerned about or whatever.
And
Yeah.
I wonder if our voice is a little different than like big pharma is telling me to get vaccinated. Of course they are. You know, like our voice is from a different place, and maybe it would be perceived differently.
Mhm. Yeah, and we do have a COVID-19 and breastfeeding page on our website, but we don't have it updated with vaccine info. And we have shared some things through social media. I'm not sure if we have through email, but again, communication support and figuring out the best way to get the word out would be great. And one question that I'll be asking when it's my turn is more about like communication pathways and social media in particular. But I wanted to share my anecdote, my N of one as well, about someone I know who did not get vaccinated while pregnant. She wanted to wait until she was breastfeeding so the antibodies from the vaccine could go to her baby while breastfeeding. So it's kind of similar thinking. But yeah, really great topic. And we still need to decide on our topics for 2022. So any ideas, put them in the chat box, email us. And thanks, Amy. We're open to any, we have, you know, a list of different ideas we've brainstormed in the past, but what would be timely? What would be a really good topic to have? We have 6 meetings in 2022. So send us your ideas.
I was just gonna piggyback on what I said before about that being vaccination being a topic. And I think like in our language around that specific meeting, I think it would be good to incorporate like just about like how it's totally valid to like question as a mother, like what we're putting in our bodies and what we're putting in our children's bodies. And you know what I mean? Cause like full disclosure, when I was pregnant with my daughter, I went through a phase of like questioning vaccines and being like, is this safe? Like, am I making the right decision? And, you know, I went back and forth and read for hours and hours, you know? So I think just like creating the conversation in a way that like allows moms to know that like, it's not bad that they are, you know, it's not like you're not uneducated or stupid or, you know, like some of the narratives that get pushed on people that are anti-vax, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, we have to validate and understand that everyone is doing what they think is the safest. And that's the hard thing, is that people aren't getting the same information everywhere, or they're not trusting it. And so it's definitely a complex issue.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but yeah, I love the idea. So beautiful, good stuff.
Did you want to go next, Kara, or do you want me to share first?
Go for it.
I think the only thing I was going to mention, and I haven't mentioned this to the board yet, but I am the program coordinator at Maine Health for the perinatal substance use disorder program. And I've been asking some questions, you know, about breastfeeding when people are on medication assisted treatment. And what's the research around that? What are the messages? And I mean, big surprise, there's lots of messages and there's no answer, but they are starting to create a policy around that. The person that's doing it has a role in the state and at Maine Med, so I'm not sure if it's state specific or Maine Med specific, but I think it's Maine Med. And I actually asked if she would want to come and do a presentation on that. So that's another one. And she was it's Elena O'Connor, and she is totally happy to do that. And she has 15 years of experience in addiction medicine. And she works at the Maine Med Clinic every Friday and seeing patients with substance use disorder during their pregnancy. So that will be really great if the board agrees. Just bring it up now. But it's really interesting. I mean, I just kind of said to her, like, flat question, can people breastfeed on MAT? And she was like, yes, unless they're using something else, which a lot of people that are going through MAT, may also be using something else, or they've used it recently, and they might again. So then in that case, you would not want to talk about breastfeeding depending on what they were using. So it's of course, clear as mud, but I think it would be really great for her to come and talk about all that. And if anybody has any questions on it now, I can ask her that too. So feel free to ask me or put it in the chat because I work with her pretty directly. So, but yeah, I'll let you know how that policy and information comes out around that.
I think that I like that topic, and I hope that outside of like just us doing it, that there will hopefully be some expansion on like the nurses and stuff that work with folks in the NICU and stuff, because one of my clients who has I think her other child is like 20 months old, but when she had her, she was told that she should not breastfeed like at all, being on MAT. And I was like, wow, I cannot believe, so I think that, the education should definitely go beyond, like, it's just crazy to me that a educated person told her that, but of course, when we know better, we do.
No, I know, and Elaine confirmed, like, even different floors of the hospital are just saying different things. So there really needs to be a protocol around it. Because I mean, it's really unfortunate that when people get different messages, and we know that happens with lactation counseling anyways, there's just so many ways you can do it. So, but yeah, I look forward to seeing what the protocol is.
Awesome. And I'm meeting with someone from the Maine Mom program next week. She's a student who is actually looking for information about breastfeeding and substance use too. And what information do we have, or could we help them create, I believe. So yeah, there are some definite opportunities for education on this topic.
Who is that you're meeting with?
I was just trying to find her name and I couldn't find it, but I'll talk with you more about it, Amanda.
Okay.
And I know, Amanda, that you've been working on prenatal education stuff too. And those are some of my questions for folks who are on prenatal education in other languages in particular. And I'm with my perinatal outreach hat, I've been talking with a couple of physicians about that, and also WIC and Maine families, and how can we better reach families who are refugees, immigrants, asylum seekers. English is not their first language, and they are maybe using more formula at the beginning than other families, and their hospital staff in particular are looking for ways to prepare them before they come to the hospital about recommendations and how to have those conversations about it. So more than just providing a handout in another language, even though that is always helpful too. Wondering in our group that we have left here, if you have any ideas or suggestions, like how do you think we could be better reaching families prenatally? And we've been talking a lot about like community health outreach workers and trying to meet them where they're at in their own communities, instead of having, a white person teaching them a class that they either can't access they can't get to in person, or they don't have internet access, or it's just not a priority for them to be taking a breastfeeding class. So always open to ideas on that. Robin, is there something that you wanted to say?
Oh, and just the first thing I think of when you think about people from other countries and completely different cultures, I often used global arts, global health media.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, that was the most valuable thing. And I was just recently in touch with a woman from Nigeria, and here she is in Maine, but no family around. And I could send her a video of a Black woman with an African accent. So that's better than me. That's all. I would introduce like nurses and pediatricians to that resource, and maybe they could have a little video loop or something. But I'm a senior white woman, so there's a big drawback right there. So that's my suggestion.
Sure. Yeah, videos are excellent too. It's something
Yeah.
I regularly include in any webinars that I do for mostly nurses around the state. But another resource for us to have on our website, if we don't already, we might not already, we might not have a section on other languages, and that is a room for improvement for sure,
That's
because
a good point.
there are quite a few resources. I think in the shared Google Doc, which I'll put in the chat box again. If you have any ideas, like Nicole, I don't think I see Maine Mother and Company groups listed on our list of groups that we've carried through each month on this document. I lost my train of thought. Add things to the document that you think would be helpful, like the global health media resource and any others. Oh, I think I had just seen on here. I thought I had seen, maybe it was from last month. Sorry. The state of Maine has, yeah, right here. I'll put that in the chat box too. Newborn feeding education materials that WIC has in other languages. So that is good to have. I think we could certainly have on our website a list of other language resources. And if you think of any, please drop them in that document if you could, or in the chat box, or email us. And another question I started to ask before was about social media. So when I was teaching a breastfeeding class the other night, someone asked, is there an Instagram person I should be following that will help educate me on breastfeeding and what to buy and so on? And I had no idea. I forgot. I may have written it down.
I can recommend one person who is a very experienced IBCLC, and she's very savvy. She's probably 30 years younger than me. Her name is Shelley Taft, T-A-F-T. She's in Massachusetts, but she has an Instagram, Twitter. She has some really great little Twitters and Instagrams. But anyhow, I often recommend her because she's hip, but I know her as an IBCLC and as a mom and as a person, and I totally trust her. So
Yeah.
Shelley Taft, IBCLC.
Well, and Amanda, I know you're taking some notes here, so thank you. But Robin, if you want to add that to that shared resource list, if you have access to it, feel free. And then maybe others. I know someone mentioned Carrie Loker is an RN. She's on Instagram and she was recommended. And then LA Lactation was another one they recommended. And I also learned about BottleBox. Have you guys heard of BottleBox? So Baby List is the website, and they created a box of 5 different bottles for families to try, which is.
I've heard of that. A lot of people are using that, like a lot of people.
It sounds
that
like
I'm seeing in groups. It's such a good idea.
Yeah, because someone was asking what bottle to try. I'm like, oh, I actually don't know. There's so many different kinds. There's not one in particular I would recommend. And someone said, oh, we just did BottleBox. I said, oh, that's so good to know. But are there any other pages or people that would be good to know about? And maybe that's something, thanks, Robin, that would be good, because I think that the Breastfeeding Coalition is not doing a lot through social media, through Instagram in particular. So I think I'm just also realizing that Facebook is for people who are my age and older. Uh, not, but an Instagram is for people in their 20s having babies and others. Certainly, it's not. I don't mean to make that total.
There are so many that I'm just gonna go through my Instagram feed and just put in all the accounts that I come back to, because I have a lot that some IBCLCs, some other doula. There's a lot of people.
Yeah.
I'll do a dump.
Awesome, thanks. And Rihanna Plord, who is with Bangor WIC, she isn't here today because she's presenting for the National WIC Association about how she's been using social media, so TikToks and so on. And she's been helping the coalition as well. So she does Bangor WIC social media, and she also does Maine State Breastfeeding Coalition. She's done a lot for us. She created a Pinterest page for the Breastfeeding Coalition, and she's been doing Instagram things and Facebook posts as well. So that's been really helpful. And I think that's, again, another opportunity that the communications group would be working on. And yeah, so that's exciting. And I think my only other question was, it's kind of it could be a bigger conversation. And I think, Nicole, you're the only doula who's here, I believe, and Amanda in the past too. There's a mom who attended one of the Maine Med breastfeeding groups recently who said that she had just kind of learned about postpartum doulas. She had never heard about them before. And she was like, they sound amazing. She's really interested in the topic now and how more people can learn about postpartum doulas. And it's something that I'm like, I know I'm a huge doula advocate and would love to see more people know about them and utilize them. And we've had some really good conversations about it, but I didn't know if there were any ideas. She has suggested, and I think it's a great idea, that every OB talks to their patients about doulas, though it's hard because they're not all accessible financially, or there aren't very many of them. So what are your thoughts, Nicole?
I would love to solve this problem. I do think that if more providers were suggesting it, that would help. Understanding that it's not, financially accessible for a lot of people, but my impression is that most providers either have no idea, or they have some liability stuff around recommending a particular person, and it's like it gets all murky there. I know that I don't know how much, how helpful this was, but Birth Roots does their you're pregnant, now what, kind of, or meet the doulas teas. And I don't know if that's still happening, but stuff like that kind of gets doulas out in front of people while they're pregnant, which is 100% the time when you should be hiring a postpartum doula.
I'm seeing Kayla's on here too. Sorry, no, Kayla's a doula. Yeah, and the Birth Roots guide in the Portland area is great too if everyone gets it, if it's given to everyone, and it kind of it makes it so the OB doesn't feel like there's a liability thing if they're not recommending one person. At least it's a resource guide. But I don't know how this happens.
Oh, sorry, Kara. I always recommend that people put doulas on their registry, as a gift card. I think it's so interesting that people don't utilize that. I mean, that's just a great time to get financial support from people instead of another toy that
more onesies and stuff.
Yeah, more cute shoes.
It's weird because what I find as a postpartum doula is people don't always get it until their baby is here. Similar to breastfeeding, it's hard to wrap your head around how demanding it is until you're doing it. And I think that goes for all aspects of newborn care and postpartum recovery. And so I wonder if, I think it gets tricky with groups like with like childbirth ed classes. You're not wanting to like be like providing advertising opportunities for doulas, but I also think that meeting a postpartum doula is the way to kind of expose more families to this as a resource and feel connected to someone. So I don't know how to make that happen in a way that doesn't feel like marketing, like, you know, in a way that feels more educational versus like, hey, hire me, other than like having doulas be the ones who are teaching childbirth ed classes. It's hard
Wow.
because you're like, you know, there's so many people who could benefit from that support, but they don't even know it's an option. So there's kind of like there's a gap before they're even like looking for someone. I actually think you sent someone to me, Kara, or someone who was in your group found me.
I think she did. Yeah.
Yeah. Or Maine Mother and Company. I
I
don't
may have
remember which
told
one.
her to contact Maine Mother.
Yeah, I think you did.
All right.
And she did. And she was like, I read the description of overnight support on the Maine Mother and Company website and I cried because it sounded so amazing. And she doesn't even have their baby yet. So it
This is
just,
someone different, actually. This is someone different.
oh, someone different. Okay. There's so many benefits. And I just think like talking about it more while folks are still pregnant and in groups like you have where parents already are, so they even know that there's someone who'll come out and hang out with you and help you.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's great when people have support from their family and extended family, but sometimes those generations can just have like outdated information. And so it's really great to have this person that's not like emotionally connected to it to give you the most current evidence around it. Because that's really hard if you're hearing something from your family that you should be doing, and then your lactation counselor is saying something different, and then
Exactly.
so
yeah, that happens a lot.
Yeah.
Keila, I don't know if you want to unmute. You've added a bunch of great information to the chat. I'm happy to read it, but if you want to share more.
Yeah, sure. So I don't know if we're like public yet, but there's several doulas, like a small group of doulas in Maine that kind of came together as like a justice collective to try to sort of expand like who has access to doulas and just like kind of get the word out there that doulas exist. And I know that we've at some of our meetings, we've talked about like what we'll be doing for advocacy work. And I know like conversations around like legislation for, you know, insurance is covering it, which I think is kind of already in the works, but yeah, just like one of the things that we're doing is like each doula that's a participant in our group will donate like 1 or 2 births a year to folks that are low income so that they, you know, have access to a doula. And we'll be doing like educational workshops. And actually, I think if I'm remembering correctly, somebody from our group came to one of the breastfeeding meetings, but I can't remember who. Anyways, once we get more grounded, I will be sure that y'all have our information and stuff.
Excellent. Was it Hannah Lord, I wonder?
Yes, Hannah, yes. Yep.
Yeah. It's exciting, really good work, and definitely keep us posted, and it might be a topic for a future meeting.
Yeah.
And, I'm just starting to talk with Cheryl Bean Moody about the BEST conference for next spring, the BEST Connection Breastfeeding Conference, and it looks like I might be doing another panel, but it might be focused on support people in particular. So having support people speak to what it's like to be in that role for breastfeeding families. So that would include fathers, partners, grandparents, doulas, and yeah, so still kind of wrapping my brain around what that might look like. But yeah, that would be another way to get the word out about doulas and how there are lots of support people available.
Yeah, I like the whole concept of our group started because like one of the ladies in our group was like at a birth worker training, and there somebody like brought up, you know, people in the Q plus population getting a doula, and a seasoned doula like made the comment like, oh, people don't even ask for that, like there's not even a need. And they were like, yes, there absolutely is, you know. So then kind of started this conversation of getting more doula services for folks that haven't, you know, historically had access to them. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome.
Several years ago, my colleague and I started presenting breastfeeding classes for grandparents, which was a catchy title. But it was ways that grandparents, well, it was always grandmothers, could be supportive to their moms, which would be sort of like a doula as well. So it was just explaining, and a lot of these moms only breastfed for a little while, or they never got to breastfeed, and so it was helpful for them to know. It didn't really take off. We had like maybe 5 people altogether. But that's another approach.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good to know, Robin.
Well, it's a nice idea. Didn't fly, but it was okay.
Maybe in a different time, in a different, slightly different way. I think there's opportunity. Maine Med does have a grandparents class. It's in general, you know, what do you need to know about safe sleep now? What do you need to know about car seats now? And, you know, all these other things that are good to go over.
Yeah, and you never know, you could have made all the difference in the world to one or all of those 5 people that did go, right?
Yeah.
All right, I think we have just a few minutes left, so we'll move on, and I'll share for our next meeting is December 2nd. So it's always the first Thursday of every even month. And Paula Norcott will be speaking about birth and breastfeeding. So I'm really looking forward to that. It'll be a great conversation that we can have, and the connecting the dots part of the meeting as well. And I don't know if we necessarily need to go around and do, you know, for everyone to speak, but if there's anything that anyone wants to share about what you're taking away from today's meeting, then please do. I think the discussion we have and that we've had today has been really great. And sometimes it's nice when we have a slightly smaller group to allow for more conversation. And I'm really appreciative of Brooke sharing all of her wealth of knowledge, just like a little bit of her wealth of knowledge really today. So thank you, Brooke. What else would folks share?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, Brooke, because I mean, I really don't understand all of that. And so just getting that baseline was like, oh, okay. Now I know like the number of representatives and then how our, you know, I'm so grateful that we have you as a resource for all that stuff. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And there's a lot that I don't know or understand either. It is really complicated. I mean, there are literally procedures and processes that like 1 or 2 legislative staff know, and we all turn to them. So we're all learning, but I'm glad it was helpful.
Hi, Pio. Hi, Pio.
Awesome. Well, we will have minutes. Thank you, Amanda, again for taking minutes today. And we'll combine, you know, I think what we've done is we've had a link to that Google Doc in the minutes and then posted them on the website, though we're a little behind on that. We still like to approve the minutes as a board. Our process is always it's always a work in progress, in a process, an improvement process. So the communications committee, man, you've got a lot of work ahead on your plate. So thank you, Robin, and others who will be part of that. Thanks everyone for joining. Hope to see you again soon. I'm going to stop recording now.